Welcome to the Voices of Otolaryngology podcast series, where we spotlight diverse perspectives and insights within the field of otolaryngology. I'm your host, Rahul Shah. Let's jump into it. All right, I am here with AJ Workforce Tompkins. You know that's your nickname?
I did not.
You did not, and you're wearing your colors there.
Yeah.
Do you want to let everybody know where you're from, where we're sitting here?
Well, I'm working in Columbus, Ohio at Ohio ENT Allergy, private group here, multi-specialty practice, and that's where we're hanging out right now.
Yeah, so you're surprised with your nickname?
A little.
Okay.
Yeah, I live and breathe it, so it's not a surprise, I guess.
Well, how about we just give a couple minutes on your background, because it involves military medicine, Duke, you're an Eagles fan, Ohio State fan, and a Duke fan. So I don't know how you got that trifecta. Do you mind just giving the group some of your background? I think it'd be great.
Yeah, so I'm from the Philly area, and I went to Duke undergrad. I went to Loyola for med school and Ohio State for my residency. And so along the way, picked up all those sports teams of interest and picked some good ones, I'd say. But yeah, it's been a good ride. It did 8 years in the Navy. It was a great time. Did a year internship, 2005 to 6, and then came out for training to 2006 to 11, and then after that, did 8 years in the military. And I was stationed at 3 duty stations all along the East Coast, and came to the practice in 2019.
Great, thank you. So AJ, I was kidding when I called you AJ Workforce Tompkins, but that does roll off the tongue. Could you tell the group, those who don't know why I gave you that nickname, we have much gratitude for you for helping us assess our workforce. Could you give some of the history behind what you've done?
Well, yeah, I can't claim all credit here. I mean, there was certainly a lot of people looking into our workforce along the way, and this is something where we stood on the shoulders of giants and certainly learned from other parties here. But I guess it's accurate to say there was academic literature always on this. It's been going on for a while, and they've provided a lot of really fantastic insight, but it tended to be very specific and nuanced. And I hadn't seen us do something very comprehensive like, say, the urology group has done. And I thought that would behoove us so that we understand what the market is doing and how we can better serve our patients and where there might be gaps there. And then also so we can benchmark for ourselves, knowing that we can derive, value from our practice and show our worth to the maximum potential that we have. So I thought I saw an opportunity there, and luckily, there was some people in leadership, Dr. Denani, Dr. Yanagasawa, and they okayed the workforce task force to be created, and I was lucky to chair it. So
great. And who are the constituents of that task force?
So there are many. I mean, we've kind of changed the.
You've evolved. Well, where are you at present? Who are the current members?
Yeah, so we've got Rhonda Alexander. And then we have Cecilia Schmalbach, Andrew Coughlin, Ben Ostrander. We added him this year as a resident in San Diego. Yeah. Doug Ray and David Yen and Tiffany Chen. And so we've have a good group, and they've worked hard on this too.
And apologies, I put him on the spot. If he missed your name, that's not on him, that's on me. So you can email me. When was our last workforce survey done, and when did you collect data for this current one?
Yeah, so we collected in 2023, and we put out the report in 2024 last year. And so we're talking about, looking at it again, of course. But that was when it came out, and it exists on the Academy website under the Business of Medicine tab. You can look at the last 2 reports, and hopefully it helps to serve the goals of understanding the market better. And I see the benefit being the greatest earlier you on the process, like the residents and people who are interested in our specialty, just knowing what the job looks like, and then also for leaders in the field to see where gaps are in terms of where patient access might be a problem and figuring out. I think the market is very good at figuring things out and devising ways of addressing problems, and that comes to the individuals and their curiosity and creativity. And I think that just putting data out there allows for that creative thought to start coming to fruition. So let's just see where that goes.
So I'm like you. I believe in an efficient market. Do you?
Yes.
Yeah, I believe in an efficient market.
And that's what this is about, right? It's just trying to create a more efficiency and, allowing people to realize their potential and worth.
When was the last workforce survey prior to this one?
Well,
to your knowledge.
To my knowledge, there was work done, and there was a thesis on this in the laryngoscope in 2016 was when that came out, I believe, and did some interesting dives there. And I think that the Academy houses some of the underlying data there, but it had been a little while until since we hadn't really looked at it ourselves. And we're a small specialty, so I think that we have, it's hard to get, an appropriate number to describe things with good statistical breakdowns and stuff because we are a smaller specialty. But it also helps us because we can look at that a bit easier in some respects.
So contrarian before we get into the workforce results, and I did write Kelsey there if you want to know what I wrote. So I'll get to that at the end. Okay, Kelsey's. So I have MGMA. My hospital would use other data sets. Why do we need a workforce survey in otolaryngologists by otolaryngologists led by a task force of otolaryngologists? I don't understand. Why don't we rely on those that exist out there?
Well, I think that, if one of the most important things is in business is control. And when we control our own data and when we own it at the academy level for our membership, and when we know it in a nuanced way, and we only know that because we're otolaryngologists, we know how to ask the questions, we know how to slice and dice things, and when we have access to membership and they're engaged in the survey like they have been, we can come up with much more powerful numbers, which then describe the truth of the market a lot better than those surveys do. I can speak to what ASPO's done recently, and certainly what we did is I think that we have, I think we have the best data.
The cleanest, sharpest data. Is that what you mean by best data?
It's
verified.
Yeah. Well, we asked them to be very specific when we talked about, say, compensation and things to that. And now were they sitting there with their W-2s and all that?
Sure.
I don't know. And so some of the MGMA stuff comes from finance types that might look over things. I don't know all the underlying mechanics as to how accurate those are, but to the degree that people's recall and answering the specific questions were accurate, I think that we have the most robust data. Now, we also gave ranges. We didn't ask for specific numbers like do you make we didn't ask to the dollar amount. We gave them ranges to allow for a little bit of wiggle room there, but we didn't want to make it too wide to be wildly inaccurate.
I think one of the neatest things being in Dr. Tompkins' office and looking over his shoulder, you actually go through each data point line by line and clean up the data.
Yeah,
I know that's a heavy sigh because it takes you like all summer.
It takes a long time, but I found it rewarding because, I don't know, it's just my nature of like living in the data like that. But, just to provide the academy members some, assurances, everything is cleaned, double checked for duplicates, and then everything is scrubbed of any identifiable information. So what we save and what we work with doesn't have any person's information on it. And so after that, we really then get to work. It's what's most rewarding, but also time consuming is seeing what people respond when you give them carte blanche and just give them like an other category to respond to. And we just ask them kind of in a very open way, what practice challenges do you have, for example, or what would make recruitment easier, and just let them just spill it and just let them tell us what they want. And that really allows for some really interesting, I wouldn't say dialogue with the membership, but it allows us to really understand the needs a bit better, where we haven't pigeonholed an answer for them to respond to, but they have really, and there's some troubling things that you read, and it's kind of sad. And that's where I think that there's opportunity here to enable practices to flourish and try to do that.
And what I think is very neat, then you take those other categories and you try to make sense of them. You try to bucket them, and that is what your cognitive effort is before you put it out there.
Yeah, so the membership actually provides us with other, data, not just data points, but other buckets to, put to create better questions next time. And so where we may have missed a category, some people say put in other, like, my APPs also do these procedures, and they're like, we should have asked that. And so you might get very different responses when you actually provide a category for people. So it just allows us to keep asking better questions and coming at this, because this is not a process that is static. It changes constantly, and so the more we can ask better questions and come at it again, the more we'll get better data and describe the truth of the market.
I think you mentioned to me before in some of our conversations, your father's a business person,
he's got his MBA. He's got a business background. He's also a lawyer too.
Yeah, sure. Or I believe your wife is non-medical. But if you're explaining to both of them, and they said, AJ, what did you spend your summer doing, or the whole year on this workforce survey? What's the big take-home point to the lay public, and then to otolaryngologists? Let's first start to the lay public.
Well, I think it really comes down, first and foremost, it's really about how are we serving the patients to the best of our capacity, and we can learn as much as we want about the nuances of cell signaling, and I'm not discounting the literature there. I mean, that's fantastic research to be doing, but if we can't bring the clinical expertise to somebody and meet them where they are and provide access to patients, really our quality is determined based on, do we bring access, and that's based on both time and distance, and then do we bring competence to that patient, and those are the things that we need to answer. And without those answers, we don't know if we're really meeting patient demand. It's supply and demand, but are we supplying the time and the location where they need us and the competence that they want when they see us? So it's really about serving the patient as best as possible. And so some of this analysis was try to keep digging into that, and we'll be doing more of that, but it requires a bit of a shift in mindset, because it's not appropriate to really describe the adequacy of our workforce based on how many doctors we have per 100,000 population. Sure. That number does not have meaning over time. It changes, productivity changes, everything changes, demand changes. So we really need to start focusing on more of a access by time and distance, and then what competency do we bring to the table there. So it was really trying to show what the market looks like, and just you're not going to do it all in the first survey. This is going to be an iterative process, and we're going to have to just keep getting better, asking better questions. But first and foremost, it's about how do we serve patients better, and the power of that is kind of daunting to think about. The workforce is this separate entity and separate thing to know about and research and study, but it's very powerful when you start thinking about it like that, and how much good you can do with it, and if you're missing things, how much you might really miss out on in terms of helping patients.
I love what you said. We shouldn't think of the workforce study as a separate entity. Indeed, it's a core of what we do. So thank you for thinking about our academy and putting that value proposition through our academy members. And that's what you're getting at.
Yeah, I mean, and academy members now, really anyone can access this, but you want to be able to contribute to this survey. That is where the power comes from. When you have a greater N, if you will, the more people who participate, the more we can accurately describe things. And so I thank the people who have contributed and will contribute in the future. But it goes out to members, and we need to be members to really participate in this, so we can help everybody and describe the market, so you can benchmark, so you can understand what starting salaries are, patient wait times, which we'll start looking at in the future. These sort of things, you need to benchmark those things for your practice, so we can understand where the gaps are out there.
So I'm going to rapid fire some questions. What was the response rate, the N, and then the percent, if you know those off the top of your head, or a ballpark?
So that's difficult. I'd probably put it in the neighborhood of, response rate varied per subspecialty. But I'd say that from Academy membership perspective, it was probably north of It was certainly north of 15%.
That's
It was
great.
probably in the upper teens.
Pretty good for a survey. It's very good.
Yeah, it's not bad.
Yeah.
I mean, we really would like to get more resident responses, and we had a much better response rate this time. It didn't come without a lot of effort, but we would like to learn more about residents and their needs and what they're thinking about as they look into the job market. And I think practices want to know that information, and we need to know more about them. Like I said, I think the people who are helped out the most by this are the leaders looking into how do we help patients better, and also residents and trainees in medical school who might be thinking about our specialty.
What is the N response rate? The number? Do you remember ballpark?
Oh, well, it varied depending on how you break it down. So actively
in aggregate,
in aggregate, including retirees, residents, everyone. I'd probably say it was over 1,500.
Thank you. That's huge. That's
sorry.
terrific. Nope. That's perfect. All right. So we're in Indianapolis. You're in the elevator with an Academy member, and they look at you and say, "Wow, I watched that great podcast, Voices of Otolaryngology. You're AJ Workforce Tompkins." What's the elevator pitch? And that Academy members, let's assume they're not super engaged. They haven't downloaded it. They haven't looked at the huge document. I think you have it in front of me here, 113-page document. What's the take home? And then we're going to go deep on it. But what's the take home?
Well, I'd first ask them to engage it and just try to sell the value of that to them. And like, wouldn't you want to know about your practice benchmarking in a way that just you can get by being a member, and you can contribute to, and its accuracy by being a member, and just making sure that they understand that there is value there, and then also trying to get them to engage their business partners or the people in their practice, otherwise their colleagues, to do the same. Because again, without more numbers to these survey responses, it loses its accuracy, and it loses the truth-telling nature of it. So,
what are some things you'd like to highlight from the workforce survey now that you have our members' ears and eyes?
I think it's interesting. There's a lot of things here. I mean, this speaks to why you can't necessarily look at numbers across time of how many otolaryngologists we have per 100,000 population. Like, we have many more APPs practicing these days. I mean, over 90% now of academic practices are using APPs, and most see patients independently. And when they're doing so, they're probably seeing patients not at the same rate as physicians, but maybe about an 80% rate, maybe between 70, 80.
So that's a huge stat
from a productivity from a productivity bump. Building. Important. Yeah. Now, I don't know, historically speaking, if we independently with EMRs and a lot of time spent on non-clinical activities and practice shifts, are we necessarily seeing as many patients independently, and are those APPs helping us to augment those losses, if there are any? I think we have to still look at those things, but really it's most important to just look moving forward from here on out. Does that allow us to serve the market? Does that allow us to serve the patient?
Did that surprise you, the APP finding, or you called it out as something interesting?
I thought it was interesting because of the productivity gains there. I think that because it counters a potential narrative about we don't have as many doctors, we need more doctors. Sure. Hey, but if we have these productivity gains over here, well, maybe that's not necessarily true, but maybe we need more. Who knows? The answer is really what it comes down to is time, and how much time does a patient have to wait, and how do we define that as an adequate wait time? We need to define that for our specialty, and I hope that we'll be tackling that here in our next workforce.
Was there anything about wait times in the workforce survey?
So we wanted to hold off on that because when do you ask it? It really does matter. Yeah. Time of year,
sure.
For what kind of patient.
Yep. True.
It does it for any given practice might have multiple offices. Yes. So do you use third next available as the industry standard? You just ask them to put their finger in the wind and say, what's generally the next time a patient getting to see you? So we need to really be careful about that. But people, I think, need to start looking at their own data and really understanding that from a patient access perspective. That's just as important as knowing the other KPIs in your practice, and financials and all the other things that might go into your practice. I think it's really important, again, putting the patient first, is to know, like, what is their access, what is your practice's access for that patient. So I think that we need to start thinking about those things and then tackling them. However imprecise or imperfect it may be initially, we need to start tackling that. We do. So we didn't ask that specifically, although we can kind of piece that out a bit when you look at the first workforce survey we did in 2022, when we asked about whether or not there was adequacy of otolaryngologists in the market. And when I think about adequacy, I mean, like, can patients get in? Can they be taken care of? Are there too many specialists or so? Like, those are the things I think of. But time and access is definitely a part of that, and how far patients have to travel. Like, so the time and distance metrics kind of do go into that assessment. And I think that this is another interesting finding. And I think the one that it's not surprising necessarily, but we see I don't know how our numbers pan out in terms of adequacy. It may be fine, but I think we see more of a problem with the dispersion of our workforce. We're seeing a lot more urban concentration, which is natural, I think, with a subspecialty getting referrals and needing to be in a more generally urban place for that. But I do think that there's a waning of people in the rural setting as more and more people shift towards hospital employed or academic practices, which again have their own challenges and pros and cons. But from a productivity perspective, we showed it that those practice environments, while they do hire more and have more APP utilization, the doctors aren't necessarily seeing as many patients. And so where does that play out? Well, again, it plays out with access and time and distance, but we are seeing more of a waning of the generalist, I think, in the rural practice setting. And as they retire and more people gravitate towards academic and urban markets, that's where I think we're going to see more and more. I mean, rural patients already struggle as is. I think that we're only going to see more of that if the trends continue. And so we need to think as a specialty, as individual practices, how do we serve the community better, and what kind of outreach do we need to do to enable that?
Yeah, the American Medical Association has a nice infographic where audiologists and some audiology extension providers say we're going to increase intra-rural areas, but actually I think the overlap is very high. 95 to 97, 98% of APPs or audiologists actually practice in the exact same area as their physician supervisor or their physician partner. Am I saying that right? It's a very interesting stat.
So it
doesn't actually increase access.
Yeah, it doesn't markedly, because they still largely need to be overseen by an ENT. There's not as, sure. I mean, some states you can independently practice, but is there competence for an APP to go out and set up shop and be an ENT practice? You're not going to really, and do they have the capacity? And this is our biggest value add to the process as doctors, is that we have the capacity to then take someone to the operating room. If they need it, they don't. So when you look at the studies that have been done on this, there's a few that I'm aware of that looked at the APP urban rural concentration, and it's still markedly urban. I mean, exactly. It's slightly less so, and so there's a slight predilection to rural practice, but it still follows the physician to a high degree.
And we see that with audiology as well. So expanding scope of audiology doesn't actually help rural access.
Yeah, I think a lot of things are done under the guise of better access, but does it truly address patient access from a time and distance perspective? I think is, where does that bear out in reality? I think may be very different from what is proposed. Yeah,
I'm putting AJ on the spot here because I wanted to call out some parts of the 2023 Otolaryngology Workforce Report. So if you can find a mirror image on his eyes, he does have the 113-page document in front of his laptop.
This episode of Voices of Otolaryngology is brought to you by
If you struggle and struggle and struggle with CPAP, you should check out Inspire. No mask, no hose, just sleep. Inspire, sleep apnea innovation.
You talked about advanced practice providers. That was super. Other things you might want to call out for our members, and by all means, let's make sure we called out the right task force members. I want to make sure we did acknowledge them. But,
No, we did.
super. But anything else you think we should call out for our members? Highlights, things that really surprised you, excited you, futuristic, opportunistic?
I really liked the opportunity, I would say, that ASPO gave our group and gave me to really look at their workforce. And I don't know what was expected initially of me from that, but I really thought it was a good opportunity to really give it a full go at learning about, let's just look at all the fellowship. I mean, it's not like this goes back centuries here. These people are living who are, these practices who established these fellowships are still around. It's, so we have the time right now to capture that data. And so I was able to capture the fellowship trained pediatric otolaryngologists and look at each one of them, seeing if they're actively practicing and seeing where they're practicing, what environments. And so I was very happy to be able to describe that workforce with a bit more clarity, I think, than had been described previously. And I was gracious for them to be able to, work with us on this and including it in our report. I know they're doing another iteration of that, which I think will bear even more fruit and describe things even better for them. So kudos to them for really taking up this torch and looking at them, themselves specifically. And I think that some of the workforce projections that went in there highlight a couple different, opportunities, problems potentially with respect to, if things are just kept at the status quo, what happens, what might workforce projections be in the context of, the pediatric population generally declining as, birth rates decline, et cetera. So, I mean, you gotta have to look at that whole picture for that subspecialty. And it was, I thought that there was a lot of interesting data there.
Yeah, fascinating. And then it begs the question, how does the Academy and other societies partner together to keep the workforce surveys going? And that's just a rhetorical comment. You don't need to answer that. What else would you pull out for our members to get them excited about this 113-page document? So subspecialization workforce, we talked about advanced practice providers.
Yeah, I think, one of the things that, bugs a lot of people was, call. Are you being compensated for call?
Yeah. Anything from there that you can speak of?
Well, I think that first it starts off with, do you even take call? And I think that, who do you take call for?
Sure.
And we certainly saw differences across the different practice settings. I think.
Is the big man an answer? Who do you take call for? I take it for the big man.
Well, I think when you're hospital employed, whether it be a non-academic or academic hospital, I think there's some expectation of call already built in. And you're not going to see as much compensation in those areas
because your compensation is built in, right? I mean,
and there's also more help in those environments.
True.
The whether it's a bit more APP dependent in the non-academic hospitals and more resident fellow dependent in the academic institutions, but in private practice they've got a little bit more play depending on the environment they're in, where you can maybe negotiate a bit better or take call or not take call. Depending on if they compensate you or not. So different markets have different power in that regard to negotiate, against you. And I think that it just benchmarks nicely for, say, for everyone really, but more so for private practice. What we didn't get into the details of how much, but it was still nice to see, what's the benchmarking for? Are you even compensated? And what kind of patients do you cover? Just your own? Anyone who comes in the door, that was neat to see. And then, of course, I think, we need to keep tackling the compensation question because we do see some differences. We saw that in our 2022 report. We see, and some of that was some lagging COVID effects, I think, and we saw some bumps in 2023. And to benchmark there and also look at ancillary income, which are investments. I mean, these ancillary income streams don't come free. I mean, people have to invest, and it's good for patient care when they don't have to go around to a bunch of different facilities. But just to see what potential there is for that, I think that when it's all under one roof, I think it was nice to see and just come at that right away again.
I know you have some graphs there. Do you mind maybe some bullet points there about the taking call? And you gave us a little bit of teaser there if you want to pull out a data point and contextualize it, maybe get people excited to go find the link and read it about it themselves.
Yeah, well, I mean, from a just you even take call perspective.
Yeah. What did this show?
I mean, or rather, you paid for call. Most people do take call, even the private practitioners. Now, solo is really interesting, and solo is unique. So if you look at our 2022 report, solo practice is really the complexion of solo practice. It really changed. It's a bit more facial plastics heavy. And so you may not get as much natural taking call at the hospital for that situation. And when it's done, it's more for their own patients. But when most people do take call now, or you paid for call, now if you see most people, it's a slight majority in single specialty groups are getting paid for call. In private multi-specialty groups, it's slightly less than 50%. And then everywhere else was in the 20 to 27% range, somewhere in there. Now, there's certainly various amounts of hospitals. Usually people cover between, 1 and 2 hospitals when they're taking call. And this is just to describe the means and medians. Different practices are different. We take call, and we have to go in a lot. So that doesn't describe our practice, but it just benchmarks things for the mean and median, which I thought was nice.
Things that you or your practice have learned, adopted, changed, advocated for based on this 113-page document. You know it better than anyone in our specialty. Are you holding it? You're just monitoring now? Anything you jumped on at your board meetings or partner meetings?
Well, I think, when you looked at this, is another interesting data point was that the initial starting salary and the expectations of starting salaries for graduating residents. Again, why we want to know more about them. Maybe we're recruiting, everyone's recruiting.
Yeah, exactly.
You want to know what is their demand. You have you have this salary you want to give them. They have a certain ask, and where are you going to meet? And certainly there's a lot to negotiate on there. But when you're talking about just compensation, we found a bit of a disconnect between what the residents expected from what the market is providing. And not just for starting salary, but also for mainly for what is the practice going to look like for you in 5 years? When you're up and running and you're really busy. And so I think that it's good for residents to see that too, because they can understand okay, maybe I need to reset my expectations to some degree. And then on the practice level, maybe we need to modify how we do compensation and how we're going to make things look more attractive given what they want and what other people are offering. Because when you're recruiting, you're really in competition, and you're wanting to know what other people are doing. And I think private practice needs to we can't offer by and large, say in the ways that the hospitals or nonprofits can, where the government basically subsidizes them with student loan write-offs. We would have to do that specifically. Yes. We're funding that ourselves, and to think about things like that, that we have to think about. And so private practice, I think the old models of even though we comprise the majority of practicing ENTs, we still need to adapt and think about new ways of compensation.
Excellent question. Just a couple more questions. Any other big take-homes you want to drive home other than imploring our members to review this 113-page document, pull out extracts that might help them in their practice? Definitely, when you do it again, you want to increase that participation rate. I'll give you some final thoughts on the workforce report or survey that you think could be member value add.
Well, I think and something else I thought was really important to look at was fellowship, or we thought was important to look at was fellowship utilization. And we looked at that a couple different ways. The first time, and this is about how do you ask the question differently? How do you drive towards the truth a bit better? First, we asked about fellowship utilization, about the people who did fellowships. Then we asked the question a bit differently the following year, and we said, okay, what's the percentage of your job that you could do just with the skill sets that you derive from residency? And the answers were actually different. You would think they wouldn't be, but they were a bit different. They weren't mirror images of each other. But when we asked that, we were able to see, and who does that help out more? That helps the trainee. That helps the trainee know, when I do this fellowship in this given practice setting, what are the odds that I'm going to be just like my attending doing this, or am I going to be like this? And is that what I want? Do I want to be someone who's this in this fellowship in private practice, and I'm comfortable with this level of utilization? And I think, granted, all practices are very different, and so I'm not trying to say that one group can or can't do anything here, but it at least provides some information for trainees to make decisions on that front. Whereas that was an unknown when I was training. You had no idea. All you had in front of you was your attendings, which were all great and fantastic. They were doing fantastic things every day. They were doing the things that were in their field. And there was no knowledge as to whether or not you would truly go out into practice, and is that going to be your lifestyle? And I think it was nice to shed some light on that in a couple different ways, and how we asked the questions in these 2 surveys, just to provide better information for the trainee.
When we look at this survey, you said in 2022 you did it. You did it again in 23?
Yeah.
All right. When do we want to do it again? 24? I mean, every year? Or never again, 10 years?
Well, it does take a lot of work, but...
Yeah, it takes a lot of your work, and we're very thankful.
Yeah, but this year we're thinking about just doing a compensation-based survey.
So more focused?
More focused, but to benchmark that again. Because if you look at our the report that came out in 2024, the survey was in 2023 asking about 2022 income. It's 2025 now.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
Things change a lot. Salary changes. You want to benchmark. Everyone's negotiating all the time. Like, contracts might change every 2 years.
Yes.
So that is something that probably needs to be updated so that we help our membership know their value and be able to negotiate, based on what they're worth, and not use antiquated information that's just, this stuff can become inaccurate within a few years. So that's why it's so important to keep after this. So, but next year we want to do another big one. So 2026 we want to do another big one that's going to be more comprehensive of things like access and time, and other modules that we're looking at right now with other constituents and parties who've expressed interest in those things.
As we come full circle, it reminds me that we want this workforce survey to be done with some periodicity, to be the authoritative, definitive voice for our specialty, right? We have others that are speaking about us. We should be the ones.
Right, and that comes from that control piece. And we own this data and control our data. If we can sort of crowdsource this in a way that is more comprehensive, I think, than other benchmarking surveys, and is specific to us, then that gives us power. That gives us knowledge. It gives us power, and I like that we have knowledge like this now.
It took a few clicks to get there on the website. Do you remember how you got there?
Yeah, so if you go to the Academy website and
ENTnet.org.
Yeah, ENTnet.org, there's a Business of Medicine tab, which if you hover over that, you'll see Otolaryngology Workforce pop up, and you can click on that. That'll bring you to the 2023 and 2022 reports. I'd also like to thank the Academy staff for the efforts they put in making this look
amazing.
Pretty and making this look in the way they did. I couldn't do this myself, and nor could our task force members. They did a fantastic job, so I really thank them for that, and the leadership that went into the creation of all this.
So when we access this survey, we have our workforce survey. You told us we want to do it on a periodicity basis, and members can use it. And have you heard from members on how they've used it? Have people bumped in and you said, "Oh, AJ, I use this for my academic institution. I used it for my press gaining scores. I used it for access. I used it to get more APPs."
Yeah, and that's one of the things that's been the most rewarding, is when you sit down at a table, and I did some mentoring sessions, and there'd be, I remember there was a fellow there at that mentoring session for medical students, and I made the comment about the workforce survey, and she said, "Oh, we all reviewed that as a department. It was fantastic. You should all look at it."
Wow.
And so it was nice to see, and where you start to see it in the literature now, where people have clearly referenced it, and that's nice to see too. But most importantly, I like when someone comes up to me and states that they utilized it and they found it very refreshing, and it helped them to understand the complexion of practices out there. What'll be the most rewarding is when there's some gap in patient access that we can identify, where leaders in our field have come forward to me and they say something like, "Here's what I did." That's really, we're a fantastic specialty and we have the best people, and I think that you all out there are going to come up with those creative solutions, and better than anyone. I think that it'll be really fantastic to see what you'll do with it, and I'm looking forward to that conversation the most. But yeah, I have had those conversations with people who have had this help them from a benchmarking perspective, changing their salary construct, or rather changing their starting salary constructs, and otherwise. So yeah, it's been.
I like that word.
Rewarding.
You didn't say it went up or down, but it changed the construct, right? You got ideas from what 1,500 other otolaryngologists are doing, and it provoked you or some other member to say, "Well, let me ask for that, or let me try that." Right? That's pretty neat. That's pretty neat. Also, Voices of Otolaryngology, we try to amplify and spread the voices, and that's also what you're doing through the workforce survey. All right, just a couple of silly questions because we're running out of time here. Have you seen the Kelsey documentary?
I think I did. It was the one that was Jason Kelsey.
Yeah, you think you did, or you don't remember?
No,
How could you forget it?
I'm fairly certain I
it's
did.
Both brothers. It's when they won the Super Bowl. It's like the best hour-and-a-half documentary. Watch it tonight. It's amazing.
I've seen this.
And Kylie's in there.
His wife's fantastic. Yeah, so I remember this. They were in their house.
Yeah, and the abuse on his knees.
Yeah,
right?
I definitely saw this.
So you're a real Eagles fan. You don't even remember it, man.
He talked about. I've seen a lot on him. He's like one of the best Eagles. But I remember this. He was talking about, what's your next chapter?
Yeah,
he was talking
right?
about his
Great,
business things he looked into. And
so do you think
they're really taking off, by the way, with a lot of stuff
great.
they've done.
That's you and me, AJ. We're going to take off. Do you think the tush push is going to be banned by the NFL?
I think it will be, because I think one of the things about a runner is that they have to be able to move under their own capacity, and that's clearly a situation where they're not. And so because it's so unique like that, and other teams have lost to us many a time.
Yeah, that's the problem. Just because they're losing, though, you got to figure out the defense.
They're a bit jealous.
I know,
they got to counter it with rule changes. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So for those reasons, I can see.
I'm a Commanders fan. We will stop you. Don't worry. Don't worry. All right, so you get one final thing. Duke, Eagles, Ohio State. What's your best rallying cry?
Oh man. That's a tough one.
People think I look like Mike Krzyzewski. It's the sharp. Why are you laughing, man? It's the sharp jaw. It's the wisdom.
I can kind of see it.
Yeah, of course you can see it. I'll look at you here so people see it. All right, Duke, Eagles, Ohio State. What's your favorite rally song?
Well,
it can't be "Fly Eagles Fly" because that's pretty boring.
Well, that's a good one. Just the typical "Go Duke" chant, and my brother went to UNC, so I got to taunt him a little bit there. So,
well, AJ, I will thank you on behalf of the Academy, our members. Thank you very much, and your whole task force.
Yeah, they've done a great job.
Yeah, the whole task force, and I want to. You're speaking on behalf of the task force, but I'm really excited. 2022, 2023, compensation coming out. 2024, 2025, you're going to do this again, and you have a full-time job.
Well, 25, we're going to look at the compensation. 26, we're going to do
26, right? Yeah. 25, we're in 25 now. Sorry. Yeah.
So things are coming. Just keep your eyes on your emails.
And you need people completing the survey, right?
Yeah, that's the most important thing. Is please participate. Everything's, like I said, everything's protected. We value your contributions, and it really does help everyone when you contribute to these.
I love what you said. We are controlling our own data. We're giving it to you all. You're de-identifying it. You're aggregating it at a macro level. We should advocate for ourselves.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, AJ, on behalf of the Academy. Thank you.
We hope today's episode sparked some fresh ideas. If it resonated with you, please subscribe and share it with friends. Have thoughts or suggestions? Use the feedback form in the show notes. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to follow us on social media for highlights, behind-the-scenes content, and updates. Thanks for listening. See you next time.